Hi there, Elise Dewsberry here from New Musicals Inc. with yet another vlog in my series, How to Get No Feedback from Elise. Now, this is the fourth and currently final part of my series on different kinds of storytelling theories or ideas or explanations. And I started with referring to my mentor, John Sparks, vaudevillian George M. Cohan, The Four Questions According to Stephen Schwartz, Pixar's 22 Rules, Dramatica, The Five Central Concepts of Dramatica by Chris Huntley, and The Seven Elements of Problem by Eric Bork. So those are all really interesting things. You can go back and check parts 1, 2, and 3. And I'm really hoping that people will give me more ideas, and I'll come back and do more parts to this series, because I know there's lots of other things out there that people are excited about and use when they're writing. The one for today, for part 4, is a pretty infamous one that most people have heard of, called Save the Cat. Now, Save the Cat, let's read what it says here. It says, it is a screenwriting term coined by Blake Snyder and refers to a particular plot device. The Save the Cat method involves having the protagonist do something admirable, like saving a cat, toward the start of the story in order to establish them as a likable person and get the audience on their side. So, sometimes you might hear it and think Save the Cat has to do with what the goal of your lead character, that by the end of it, they need to save the cat. But, that's, and I love cats, but usually that's not quite going to be enough for your story. So saving the cat refers to doing something nice like that at the beginning of your piece that makes the audience buy into that character and like them, and therefore want to stick with them throughout the whole piece. Now, this theory is basically aimed at screenwriting, as many of the theories out there are. There are so many out there that are aimed at screenwriting. I think most of them are adaptable to musicals. There are some other things that have to come into play in a musical. There are additional things. I think there are very few storytelling ideas in screenwriting that don't apply to musical theater. I think musical theater has some additional ones of its own because of the fact that you're telling part of your story through song that adds some different layers to it. And then, of course, screenplays, often they're broken into 3 acts, or they have different kinds of points along the way, which do not equate, generally speaking, to the standard theatrical idea of Act 1 and Act 2. So that's fine. Just make sure in your mind that you understand that, generally speaking, if you're doing a screenplay version of a 3-act story structure, the first 2 acts are usually going to occur in Act 1 of your stage piece, or they might overlap a little bit. Overlap the intermission a little bit. So they're different ideas of structure, and that's okay. They're not incompatible. You just have to understand when you're using those other forms of structure that they don't automatically relate to the theatrical structure, to where you put your intermission. In other words, they don't necessarily help you figure out where you're going to put your intermission in a theatrical piece. Doesn't matter, though. They're still really useful in determining the structure of your story, not necessarily the structure of your intermission. But the interesting thing about Save the Cat is that, although you could just say that's all it is, have them save a cat and everybody will like it, but a lot more stuff has come out with Save the Cat that really walks you through all the steps along the way. And I think there are many, many different versions of it online. There are courses taught on it. There's all kinds of stuff. So do your own Googling. I found one that I'm going to walk you through that takes you through sort of in a page structure, like by page 1 you should do this, and page 10 you should do that, which again applies to a screenplay and not to a musical. But the basic concepts, even if the exact division of your pages isn't the same, the basic concepts are always really, really useful in any kind of storytelling. So let me walk you through these. So number 1 is the opening image, which happens on page 1. Start strong with an image that catapults your audience into the look and feel of your story. That's a very filmic thing, a little bit tougher to do in a stage musical, not completely, but it is a little bit more film oriented. Number 2, theme stated, page 5. Film structure requires that the theme of the film is communicated by someone fairly early on. Commonly, this is dialogue spoken to the protagonist that he doesn't quite grasp yet. That's an interesting idea, that the overall idea of what your theme should be can be stated very early on. Your protagonist just either doesn't understand it yet, or doesn't see the pathway towards it, or whatever it is that prevents them from knowing that. But the audience can have a sense of where you're headed, potentially. Number 3, setup, pages 1 to 10. Use your first 10 pages wisely. Here you'll need to establish your story scope and look and feel for the audience. First, show your character in their old world. Let the audience know what the status quo is for them, then hint at the adventure that follows. Second, establish all the characters who will factor into your main story beats. This may take some creativity. Sometimes for story reasons, you will just have to hint at those characters. The setup is one of the most important sections of your script because it provides the essential context needed for the audience to become either immediately engaged or lose interest within the first 10 minutes. Obviously, as a screenwriter, the former is required to sustain a career. Yeah. Now, how does that translate to a stage musical? I think a lot of what they're talking about here with the setup, establishing the world, and introducing us to the characters is the kind of stuff we often would ascribe to an opening number, interestingly enough. So there's a lot that can be accomplished in a musical through an opening number to let us know, here's what the world is like, here's the status quo, here's the people we're going to meet, here's maybe the theme we're headed for, and usually somewhere often by the end of the opening number, we'll also either know the lead characters want and or the conflict that they're going to face. Those things can all be established in an opening number. He's saying the first 10 minutes of the movie. I would say you might have a little bit longer when someone's paid money to sit down in the theater and watch something. You might have a little bit longer to grab them than 10 minutes, but not much. You know, if you haven't done it by 15 or 20, the odds of them staying past intermission are pretty slim. Number 4, the catalyst, page 12. In a screenplay, sometimes called the inciting incident. The catalyst is the event that disrupts your protagonist's status quo, but they're not ready to make the choice that catapults them into the story just yet. Inciting incident, that's a really, really important concept and is going to happen in every single story. So that's the idea of establishing what's the status quo, how was it before, and then what is the thing that happens that changes everything, that sets your lead character on a different path. And it can be because they figure out what they want to do, or because something's denied to them, or something in their world changes that forces them to have to look outside of it, any number of things. So very important stuff. Number 5, debate, pages 12 to 25. This is where the protagonist has doubts about setting out on their perilous journey, refusal of the call. That's very interesting. I'm not sure off the top of my head that I'm convinced that in a musical, you really have time for very much refusal of the call. Not that you can't do any, but, and I think that this is where you start to deal with some of the differences between a movie or other forms of storytelling and a musical. Because you have to have room for the songs and you have a limited amount of time. Granted, it's generally speaking similar or sometimes even more time than you would have in a movie, but a lot of that time is going to be taken up with songs. And so the plot itself has to be a little bit more succinct. So I wouldn't spend a whole ton of time on the refusal of the call. Not that you can't do it, but I would be, I would be cautious about that in a musical. And of course, I'm going to read off all these pages, but again, when you're writing the book of a musical, these page numbers are not necessarily going to correlate. So the order of events is really useful, but I wouldn't be, a stickler about exactly what page these things are happening on. Number 6, break into 2, page 25. Inevitably, your protagonist will overcome his or her doubt and make a choice to start out on their adventure. This is the choice that officially sets the plot in motion. From here on out, your Save the Cat beat sheet template will be filled with obstacles and twists resulting from making this choice. Great. Now they're saying that doesn't happen until page 25. I mean, obviously the sooner you can have an inciting incident and get things going, the better. But as long as everything that leads up to it is also interesting, I guess you could delay it a little bit. Number 7, B story, page 30. The A story revolves around the choice your protagonist made as Act 1 breaks into Act 2, and they mean film structure there. But another subplot ensues, commonly a love story. Blake Snyder suggests this at around page 30 to illustrate the theme of your film. So a subplot, and musicals really benefit from subplots without a doubt. Number 8, fun and games, pages 30 to 55. Thankfully, the Save the Cat beat sheet template is not just all work and no play. Your plot structure requires a stretch where your protagonist wields their new power and does cool stuff with it. So in other words, things can be going pretty well. Again, in a musical, I would caution about that a little bit. I think you want to keep the conflicts coming, keep the obstacles coming, because I don't know how much time you have. On the other hand, I do believe that in Act One of the theatrical structure of a two-act musical, you can afford to spend a little bit more time delving into character, taking slight tangents, meeting other people, being in other places. These are things that you do not want to take time for in Act Two, because now the story should be cooking and moving forward, and we're just not interested in taking that time. So if you want to write a comedy duet between some characters in your B plot, probably it better be in Act One. Just a thought. Anyway, number 9, midpoint, page 55. At some point, your protagonist will either get what they're after or not, but there will be consequences either way. So this suggestion is that only happens around page 55. In John's theory, a musical is about someone who wants something, what they do to get it, whether they get it or not. The whether they get it or not is the very end of the story. And the whole middle of the story, the bulk of your storytelling, is all the things that stop them from getting it. It is true that at some point they'll either get it or not. You could always have them get something and then discover that's not what they want, and that sends them on a further journey. Or they don't get what they want and it sends them on a further journey. But then it always has to be about upping those stakes and keeping the conflicts coming. Like they say, there's consequences. Number 10, bad guys close in, pages 55 to 75. After your protagonist gets what they want or not, there will be consequences. These forces will tighten their grasp and throw the protagonist off balance. These forces don't necessarily have to be actual antagonists. It can also be fighting within the protagonist circle. So this is an interesting slight departure. For me, once the lead character gets what they want or doesn't get what they want, the show's probably over. But there are different ways of looking at that. So it could be that everything's happy and your protagonist finds wants to, I'll blue sky one for you. Your protagonist wants to be a famous singer, and they're taking lessons and getting ready, but sort of stuck in their little town, and then they see a poster for a song contest, and this is the inciting incident, right? Yeah, I'm going to go to Nashville and I'm going to try out. And they go, and then and they have fun and they meet people and stuff is going on and they're prepping it. But then when they do this contest or whatever, they lose. And so now they got to figure out, so do I try again? Do I try something else? What else is going to happen in my life? So I can see an instance where a main character is pursuing a goal and then they lose it, and that puts things on its head and keeps things moving in a different direction. Perhaps a little bit bumpier in a musical than you might want to get into, only because, again, we got to leave room for songs. So it takes up some of that storytelling time. Anyway, number 11, all is lost, page 75. In film structure, the dire circumstances your protagonist endures will lead to an inevitable loss. This is usually a character, and classically the mentor. Think Obi-Wan, Gandalf, and Morpheus. So they mean someone dies. Yes, if it's dramatic, this might how I relate to this immediately is this is the sort of thing that often might happen at the end of Act One. That will make us go, uh-oh, what's going to happen next? And send us off to intermission thinking, I better come back and find out what's going to happen. So that might be one way to think of it when you're working in a theatrical structure that has an intermission. Whatever the loss, sorry, I wasn't done with that one. Whatever the loss, it's felt deeply because this item or person gave the protagonist their bearings. Cool. Number 12, Dark Night of the Soul, pages 75 to 85. This is the most dire circumstance your character reaches. At this point of the Save the Cat beat sheet template, your protagonist has lost hope. And again, to me, that's an Act Two thing in a theatrical structure, that something major happens at the end of Act One, and now in Act Two, your lead character is dealing with that and very possibly losing hope or floundering. Number 3, break into 3, page 85. So this is there when they say break into 2 and break into 3, they're talking about the 3-act film structure. And like I said, Act 1, film Act 1 and part of Act 2 were in the first theatrical act, and usually the rest of Act 2 and Act 3 are in Act 2. I wish we didn't use the same words, act, but we do. Break into 3. Like a forest fire, loss and misery are followed by new life. In plot structure, this is where your protagonist claws around in the darkness only to find or remember something useful. Aha. Number 14, finale, pages 85 to 110. Treat the finale as the Act 3 summary. Film Act 3, obviously. The Save the Cat beat sheet template is at its end, so it's time for the protagonist to take on their foes. Well, 85 to 110, that's still a lot of time, right? So that there's the big battles and everything happens there. Armed with new tools and self-discoveries, the protagonist often synthesizes what they've learned in Act 2 with values they've always had in Act 1. Interesting. Okay. To me, that would be the bulk of your theatrical Act 2, would be, fighting the battle, so to speak. Number 15, final image, page 110. And that would be, that's the ideal length, I guess, for a screenplay, obviously different for a musical. Along with the opening image, the final image creates the bookend that encapsulates the journey. It's the last thing the audience sees and should cement the theme of the film as well as represent what happened and changed over the course of this journey. In a musical, that's your finale. Right. And it has to do that even more because it isn't just a parting moment or a parting image. It tends to be a whole big musical number that has to really wrap everything up for us. Okay, cool. So that's I've seen people use this beat sheet to map out their story for a musical. It's certainly usable. So there's all kinds of great ideas in all of these. That's why I wanted to talk about all of them. And I know there are more, so please, if you get a chance, drop me a comment or send me an email and tell me your favorite ones, and I'll try to talk about them and relate them to musical theater in the future. So thanks again for listening, and toodaloo.